Hello everyone, and welcome back to Transcendent Philosophy. This is Seth here, and today we're going to be going back into my blog to discuss the blog titled Brotherhood, A Path to Peace. As you can see, there's an image here. The images of the American flag and the Chinese flag. Brotherhood, A Path to Peace. This is a topic that is very important to me. It's very personal to me. I've been pondering and thinking about this and worrying about this for over a decade. And as we go through this, perhaps you'll start to see why. Problem. Thucydides was an Athenian military general in the 5th century BC. He predicted that war between Sparta and Athens was inevitable because Athens was growing in power at a rate that threatened the dominance of Sparta. Thucydides posited that Spartan fear of Athens' growth made military conflict inevitable. He was one of the first people to connect collective psychology to collective conflict. Graham Allison, in performing an analysis of different Thucydides traps occurring throughout history, found that 12 out of 16 different Thucydides traps had actually resulted in war. There have been criticisms of Allison's methodology, but this gives us a rough heuristic for estimating the danger of these traps. All else being equal, this gives us about a 75% chance for getting stuck in a trap of violence. Many people have hypothesized that China's growth is currently unsettling America, threatening to take away America's spot as the world's top superpower. Stories of Chinese aggression permeate the information landscape. As you can see here, I've got an image of 7 different factors that we'll be discussing in a moment. Factors. If we were to try to delineate the factors that contribute to a Thucydides trap, I would be inclined to say that 1. Perceived acceleration of the rising power. That's a factor. Perceived decline of the superpower. Another factor. Rate of amplification of narratives. That's another factor. The number of areas of contestation. Another factor. The communication gap. The empathy gap. And the value gap. Totaling 7 different factors. At a minimum, we've got these 7 different factors that are contributing to this Thucydides trap of inevitable conflict. The word perceived here is important. Often our actions are less connected to reality, but rather they are connected to our understanding of reality, that which we perceive. So given these factors, I would say that each plays a significant role in our current Thucydides trap. Perception of the rate of decline of nations can be manipulated by the media, but there are often cold, hard economic facts on the ground, and these also mold our perceptions. Economic realities are not easy to change, but the role of media is much more malleable. A Pew Research Center survey shows that Americans have a less favorable view of the Chinese than the Chinese do of America and Americans. This might indicate a difference between capitalism-driven media in America and state-governed media in China. If it is not in China's interests to go to war with the USA, China can forbid its media from producing anti-American narratives for popular consumption. The US, on the other hand, has less of a top-down power function for censoring and controlling the negative perceptions on China. For us, it may very well be the case that profit motives, profit incentives, are encouraging the propagation of negative narratives about scary foreign powers like China. The more ominous thought is the idea that it might be in the interest of the top 1% of American elites to actually want to go to war with China. If there is such a motivation, it would be easy for them to add incentives for anti-China narratives to an already energized, capitalism, fear-driven media industry. In our age of social media technologies, amplification of narratives seems to be much more powerful than at any other point in our history, since narratives producing negative emotions are more interesting and visceral and emotional than narratives that produce positive emotions. Negativity is systemically incentivized by that which we naturally are magnetized and drawn towards. We want to figure out what our fears are so we can manage our fears. Our information technologies can spread these stories at a faster rate than ever in ways that magnify our fears, magnify our anxieties, magnify our anger, outrage, frustration, and disgust, creating a feedback loop that entices more consumption of negatively valenced media. So I think we can see that it is in a media company's profit interest to magnify these human impulses, these human weaknesses, our desire to manage our fears. So I think that these tech companies, the tech oligopoly, should be asking itself some important questions. They should be asking themselves, Is our technology accelerating and making worse whatever Thucydides' trap was already in existence, right? Is Facebook making the conflict between US and China even worse than it already was, right? That's what they should be asking, because how much profit can be made when nuclear war begins? If you want to be a capitalist, if you want to maximize profit, the worst thing you can do is sacrifice the future for the present, right? You can make some quick gains, right? Get rich quick scheme. Sure, these companies, they can try to accelerate this frustration with China, but when war begins, they're not going to have any profit if there's destruction everywhere. So they need to make sure to curtail their profits in order to maintain long-term profits. All right, intersections between powers' interests. So the USA, we have things we're interested in, and China has things that they are interested in. The greater the number of intersections between the dominant power's interests and the rising power's interests, the greater the probability of conflict as these interests are clashing against each other. At a minimum, we have conflicts with China over human rights issues, with China being involved in Taiwan, the South China Sea, Hong Kong, the Xinjiang Uyghurs, Tibetan Dalai Lama, and miscellaneous religious freedom issues. There are also economic issues with intellectual property theft, technology theft, spying, child labor, slave labor, tariffs, manufacturing vulnerabilities, Chinese interference in US politics, Chinese economic pressure on American celebrities, and Chinese economic pressure on American company policies. China may have many areas of discontent towards America, like American involvement in the Middle East, American bullying tactics, American information warfare, American trade policy, American CIA operations to incite rebellion within China, etc. In my view, there are way too large a list of areas of contentions to make for a healthy escape from the Thucydides trap. We've got traps all over the place. All of these conflicting interests is just a minefield of problems, each one requiring a lot of care and attention to detail to unwind successfully. In order to resolve conflicts without violence, communication is often key. The Chinese language, it has a high barrier to entry, since the complex written style of the characters is ubiquitously intimidating. And Chinese insular culture, their closed nature, on average, it gives them a lower amount of motivation to learn a foreign language for the purpose of befriending other nations and cultures. To me, this seems to create a perfect storm for a communication gap, where neither group, the USA nor China, has a strong enough desire to put in the effort necessary to overcome this language gap. For Americans, learning Chinese is just too hard, and maybe they don't have that much interest in such a foreign and bizarre culture to them. And same with China. China has had their culture for 5,000 years, and they're used to it. They're set in their ways, and they like their language, and why do they need to learn English? Why do they need to learn other cultures, right? There's a lack of motivation going both ways. A study out of the University of Toronto has shown the existence of a racial empathy gap. This is huge. When observing other races performing tasks, our brains don't light up as much as if it was a member of our own race that was performing the task. Scientists have determined that the areas that fail to light up are parts of the brain involved in motor function processing. Essentially, what should be happening is the brain should be trying to recreate the task being observed by mirroring the motor functions in the motor cortex as a type of empathy. Like, we should be empathizing with the work that they're doing and recreating that work in our brain. But for some reason, the brain is less motivated to try to process the efforts of those who are of a different race. The value gap is often the source of moral differences that bubble up into ideological and political conflict. A common phenomenon of debate is the premature tendency of ideologies to conclude that they are correct before trying to fully understand the position of their opponents. The purpose of debate becomes less about finding truth and more about defeating an opponent's worldview. This failure to try to understand another's perspective is a type of empathy gap. But even if the empathy gap is able to be closed, that doesn't necessarily mean that value differences can still be reconciled. For example, we may be able to understand the reasons why China lays claims to things like Taiwan and the South China Sea, but that doesn't necessarily mean that our values will align with theirs on those issues. I am inclined to think that the reconciliation of values requires intense communication from both sides, communication of the sort that comprises a dialectic, where both parties are acting in good faith with the goal of getting to the best solution together. This value gap may require discussion of the beliefs and epistemologies that form the foundation of their value systems. Perhaps certain beliefs and epistemologies will have to be altered in order for a new synthesis of perspectives to emerge. This is probably the hardest part of the Thucydides trap, because it requires such an intense set of communications across entire cultures and populations of people. Like, the hearts and minds of billions need to be updated with very in-depth communication. And most people just give up. Most people don't even think it's possible to do this type of dialectic. Grassroots strategy. Our modern media landscape is a complex phenomenon. It seems that often the interests of the rich and powerful impact the way media operates. But media powers have been decentralized as new technologies make it easier for the average person to have a voice, like YouTube. The power of the people to impact the media grows every day. If we can arrive at a cultural solution at the grassroots level, at the level of each individual, perhaps that a solution at the individual level can be propagated into the media to solve factors 1 through 3, involving the perception and the propagation of narratives. Right? Individuals might be able to put their voice into the media and change perceptions based on their added perspective, and propagate a different narrative based on their added voice. Factor 4 is heavily connected to factor 7, in that our value systems govern how we feel about areas of contention. So remember, factor 4 is the multiplicity of competing interests between nations, and factor 7 was our value systems. So for example, America has an interest to the South China Sea because America wants to make sure that there's free trade, right? The spice must flow freely, basically. China has an interest to the South China Sea because they want to protect their own flow of trade, and they have a fear of perhaps their China Sea getting shut down due to a military conflict. If the South China Sea gets shut down, they lose their ability to import oil. 80% of their oil is imported through the South China Sea, and so they have a huge vulnerability if their import channels get cut off by military activity. So that's a fear-based interest. China also has a positive economic interest to access the oil resources that are from the islands within the South China Sea. So we've got competing interests, but then we've got value systems that are applied to those interests, right? Valuing freedom, America valuing freedom, gets applied to travel in the South China Sea. And Chinese historical autonomy is a value that gets applied to the South China Sea, for example. So factor 5 was the communication gap, and factor 6 was the empathy gap. And factor 5 is linked to factor 6 in that we won't have enough motivation to bridge the communication gap, the language gap, until we first resolve the empathy gap. So to me, fixing the empathy gap is the necessary first step in kicking off a series of cascading domino effect changes in the culture that can shift us closer towards peaceful reconciliation with China. Once we establish a culture of love and empathy with China, then we can be motivated to overcome the communication gap, which will lead us to having deeper and richer discussions about the nature of our values gap. Simultaneously, media organizations will be motivated to report narratives more accurately since they can empathize with both sides. The more people develop empathy, the less likely they are to propagate harmful narratives. Potential hell. In this sense, I'm using the word hell in the very non-literal, the very symbolic, the very abstract sense. Basically, hell is just a situation that sucks, right? Well, that's what I'm talking about here. If you don't like this usage of the word hell, perhaps you could replace it with dystopia, right? Potential hell. Do you have children? Do you have nieces or nephews? Can you imagine children all over the world with beaming smiles on their faces, ignorant of all the problems that may be coming their way? If you knew that war was coming for them, if you knew that they would have to fight in the deadliest war known to man, if you knew that they would have to suffer worse than you could ever dream, if you knew that there were beautiful, lovely people on both sides of the war, if you knew that these innocent children would one day have to be brainwashed to view each other as enemies and slaughter each other, what would you be willing to do to avoid such a fate for these beautiful children all over the world? What would you be willing to sacrifice to spare them from disaster? What would you be willing to suffer in order to reduce their suffering? How much effort would you be willing to put in if you knew you could make a difference? Potential heaven. Imagine that it was possible that if a concerted effort was made by humanity, that we could resolve our tribal differences. Imagine a world that prioritizes love, empathy, and friendship over villainization of the other. Imagine a world that prioritizes forgiveness and self-sacrifice over resentment and revenge. What if these principles were contagious? What if our good-faith efforts to extend a hand of friendship could be reciprocated? What if friendship led to trust and deeper communication? What if all of our disagreements could be resolved through this deep and undying commitment to friendship? What if we could avoid the possibility of ever having a World War III because we put in the effort to create bonds of love instead of bonds of hatred? Simple solution. What if I told you that the path to world peace might be as simple as watching a Chinese television show? Would you be willing to do something as simple as that? Such a easy and pleasurable task. What if that could trigger a butterfly effect that becomes a catalyst for a chain of reactions that pushes the world away from this infinite suffering and towards a potential utopia? Wouldn't that be worth it? If you aren't persuaded, be patient with me, and we'll see if I can address your concerns further down. If you are already persuaded, then check out my blog post, The Philosophy of Chinese Dramas, perhaps for some tips on how to get started with which Chinese show to watch. There's a whole variety of shows that are great romances for girls that are interested in that, and some action-oriented shows for guys that are more interested in that. Anecdotes. I know anecdotes aren't the best form of evidence, but they're at least something to think about and consider. Me personally, I have been thinking that an easy way to cultivate a perspective of brotherhood with the Chinese is to watch Chinese dramas, Chinese movies, Chinese television, so that we can connect with their humanity, connect with their culture, and connect with their morals via their stories, right? Something about watching a hero struggle through the vicissitudes of life, all of the problems of life, watching them go through these ups and downs. I think it draws up within us an emotional bond with them, right? We begin to root for them. We learn to see through their eyes and feel how they feel and hope for the things that they hope for. This is kind of like a bond of love. Even though illusory, I think this will open up new emotional doorways in our minds and hearts. If we can learn to love a Chinese hero, we might be able to find a way to have the same kind of love for the Chinese people. One individual who followed my suggestion to watch a Chinese drama was able to find it quite enjoyable, despite some cringy moments that might be harder for American culture and American tastes in media to accept. He told me that he agreed that the experience of watching a Chinese drama helped add depth to his understanding of the Chinese people. In watching the characters go through their stories, he was able to grow a deep emotional intimacy with the characters, in identifying them, rooting for them, and admiring them. He admitted that before watching the show, it was harder to get a grasp on the Chinese culture. His understanding was limited to general group characteristics. But watching the show helped reify how similar the Chinese are to us in their basic humanity. The show was able to add a level of nuance to their humanity in the way it shows a variety of Chinese personalities along the spectrum between good and evil. He confessed that it did a great deal for him in helping him develop the emotional capacity for feeling a type of brotherhood with the Chinese people. Risk reduction. Realistically, watching a Chinese television show is probably not enough to save us from our Thucydides trap, but it might be just relevant enough to help cause a series of cascading changes that leads to a cultural shift in the way we deal with China. If watching a Chinese television show reduced the probability of World War III by just 1%, would it be worth the effort? If we are destined to the inexorable fate of a World War III, perhaps inculcating a culture of love towards China will help reduce the amount of suffering caused by wartime atrocities when that sorrowful day arrives. Perhaps if the children of today are inculcated with a brotherhood and love and empathy for the Chinese, perhaps when they invade China or when they have to fight the Chinese, they will be less likely to be atrocious and they will be more respectful of human rights despite their patriotic duties. So here's a diagram of political biases, and it shows how the more biased you are, the less accurate you are, right? Biases are, by definition, things that alter your ability to be accurate. And so fact-checking brings you closer to the truth. Biases get you closer to narratives. Biased models. I view bias as a tendency to be inaccurate with respect to the truth, or the tendency to favor certain information channels, and this favoring of certain information channels then corrupts your understanding of reality. Biases seem bad if they cause inaccuracies, but from our brain's perspective, biases are our best attempt at getting to the truth with the least amount of effort. You could say that biases may have their utility. After all, if our biases are natural, then there must be an evolutionary reason for them. Our brains are constantly trying to absorb information in order to build predictive models of the world. We want to predict the future as accurately as possible so that we can succeed in the world. But there is too much information for us to absorb and process. We must rely on biases to help make our lives easier and save our brain some effort. After all, the brain burns 20 to 25% of our total energy consumed by the body. If we can save some energy that is being used by using these biases as a crutch, we can be more efficient overall. So I think people often treasure their biases because these biases have proven useful to them in the past, right? For example, if you learn a personality schema, there's a lot of personality schemas. They could be color-based, a red personality versus a blue personality. They could be letter-based, like INTJ personalities, or they could be zodiac-based, Cancerian personality, right? Aquarius personality. So you can convince yourself that this model is helping you understand the world better. These models become emotionally important to us because we feel like they have had their utility. We feel like we've benefited from them, right? If someone criticizes a model that you treasure, you will become upset. Why? Because we don't want our models taken away from us. We want to fight the temptation to give up on our models, because without them, we will have to use our brain's energy to develop a new model, a way to understand personality, for example. And our new model, it might have lower predictive quality. It might be worse than what we had before. We need to first be convinced that there is a superior model of the world available and understandable, comprehensible, before we'll be comfortable dropping our old model of the world, right? In a sense, we have to learn a new model. So we have to be able to have two models in our brain. We have to have the old personality model in the brain, and then we have to learn a new personality model in the brain. And then we can kind of measure which one is better. It's like, oh, this new one, it has even more predictive value. This old one has more errors. And so once we have two models in our brain, we can compare them better, and then we can feel more comfortable dropping the old one because we already have something reliable to replace it with. So that will reduce our anxieties. Cost of bias. Because we don't have a better model of the world at hand, hypothetically, we will rely on our best available models too heavily, right? If we haven't learned a new model yet, we will just completely rely on the old model. But then we will be blind to the inaccuracy of the old model because we have nothing to compare it with. Our brains will stop spending effort to question the accuracy of our model. We're not going to question ourselves, because why should we? We might even use mental gymnastics to twist reality, to twist the observations to fit our models. But this means that we have become committed to inaccuracies. If we have become committed to being inaccurate, then we can develop a feedback loop of information inaccuracies that leads us to getting more and more inaccurate as we keep sticking to our guns, we keep consuming our own inaccuracy, which grows the inaccuracy gets bigger and bigger until we land in an extremist worldview, right? We start spinning further and further away from reality as those errors start to compound on top of each other. Because of information acceleration, with the digital landscape dumping info on top of us, a small inaccuracy, a small percentage of error in our predictive models of the world can corrupt the information you pay attention to, which further reinforces the narrative that you are already biased to favor. Confirmation bias. War on bias. I think as a collective, we must declare war on our inaccurate and irrational biases. We have to look within ourselves and say, I am against all of these biases. As the truth becomes harder and harder to decipher in our information landscape, our desire to fight our biases must grow. Collective sense-making is essential for collective decision-making. As the stakes on our decisions grow larger and larger, we must put more effort into those decisions. We can't afford inaccuracies at a time when potential dangers and potential disasters linger about like time bombs all around us, whether it be climate change, racial tensions, conspiracy theories, pandemics, nuclear proliferations, national rivalries, political revolutions, religious upheavals, signs of deep corruption, or AI regulations. We can't afford to make the wrong decisions as a collective. We must be forward thinking. We must have accurate vision. We must care about the truth more than our biases. If we let our biases win, then we as a collective might lose. So here's an image of an attempt to measure biases from extreme left to extreme right. Accuracy of reporting, I believe. This is one of the, when you search for media reliability, often there are attempts to measure the reliability of different news outlets. So that's an example of bias metrics. We should be constantly developing and using new technology to monitor biases as a collective. If biases are measured, then people can become conscious of these biases, and they can resist the biases easier if they know they're there. If people learn to become disgusted by unfair bias in the media, on both sides of course, then people will naturally gravitate away from biased media, and sources of bias will lose market share. By changing the interests of the masses, we can change the trustworthiness of the information landscape. We can hold the media to a higher standard of rigor. What do I mean by that? Biased media, it only exists because biased people love it. And because biased people love it, they make lots of money, right? And if they make money, they propagate. But if people become less biased, then they won't listen and pay attention to biased media. So biased media will start to dwindle because no one's paying attention to it. They don't make any money. And so if everyone starts paying attention to balanced and fair and accurate media, then accuracy and fairness will grow in power because they're making more money, right? So this is a failure of the human individual, and the market is just reflecting human weakness back at us. So we need to strengthen the individual so that we can fix our markets from the ground up. So here are a couple examples of things to check out. These are groups that are attempting to measure biases and kind of present more metrics and more fair outlooks. So checking this out, these are some good strategies for the future that should be built upon. Ground News, Wall Street Journal, Blue Feed versus Red Feed, the News Center, All Sides, and CAS Tools. Consciously targeting biases. In order to properly fight our biases, we must bring them out of our unconscious mind and into the realm of our consciousness. We need to develop a routine in our minds that is constantly looking for evidence of our own biases. Once you have identified your own biases, then you need to take action to fight them. If you have bias against a certain religion or lack thereof, you might be biased to consume media that propagates that bias. And so in order to fight that, you must consume media from the group that you are biased against. So for example, every atheistic YouTube video you watch, you might need to watch a religious YouTube video to kind of counteract that bias. If you have a bias against a nation, for example, China, you might need to consume media that is produced by China. If you have bias against a political party, then you need to consume media from that political party. Only by listening to the other side can we develop empathy. This is very hard. Very hard. And sometimes it backfires. There is a thing called the backfire effect. Sometimes listening to the other side makes us more convinced of our original perspective. And there's often an objective truth behind all this stuff. So I'm not saying that both sides are equally correct, but by listening to both sides, we can empathize with their thought processes, right? So maybe by listening to the religious perspective, you might be like, oh, I don't believe that you're right. I'm not more convinced that you're right about your religion, but at least I'm more open to the idea that you are coming from a good place, right? If I don't listen to your perspective, it might be easier for me to just demonize you as you're just a liar who's out for money. But if I listen to you, I'm like, oh, maybe you're still wrong, but at least you have good intentions. And that is very important. One-sided thinking. The easiest way to discover biases within yourself or within others is when you notice that only one perspective is being laid out in a conversation. If someone is able to articulate all of the ways China's government is evil, but they are unable to steelman the Chinese position and explain things from China's perspective, that exposes an inherent bias. If someone is aware of China's sins, but is unaware of America's sins, there's a bias showing. If you only know the pros of a religion, but you don't know the cons, there is a bias showing. If you only read media that criticizes the president, but you never read media that defends the president, a bias is showing. It's one-sided. Black and white thinking. If you have polarized opinions, you might be engaged in black and white thinking. Black and white thinking develops when one-sided thinking happens for too long. If you are fed constantly American perspective your entire life, and you never learn the Chinese perspective, you will most likely develop a black and white paradigm for understanding China as the bad guys and America as the good guys. But life is never this simple. So you need to learn to wake up from black and white mentalities. Here's a quick rundown of some facts that might remind you that the idea that America is the innocent good guy isn't such a clear determination. Before World War II was over, the USA turned captured Japanese soldiers against the Chinese communists. They helped transport and mobilize over 500,000 Chinese nationalist troops, and they sent 50,000 to 100,000 US troops to fight the communists. So before World War II, we were already sabotaging the communists in multiple ways. During the decade of US operations against China in the 1950s, the USA conspired with Burma and Taiwan in launching military strikes on China from the islands of Quemoy and Matsu. We launched CIA operations into China, which we admitted to 2 decades later after our spies got caught. And we attempted assassinations on communist leaders, specifically Zhou Enlai. Between 2 decades of the 1950s and 1960s, the US registered many violations of Chinese airspace with unauthorized spy drones that were sometimes shot down. We leveraged the Tibet people against the Chinese by promoting Tibetan hatred for the Chinese. One of the Tibetans said, "We only live to kill Chinese." We supplied and funded Tibetan military operations against China. We trained over 200 Tibetan terrorists in secret training camps in Colorado, under the false pretense that the US cared about Tibetan independence. And we planned an almost genocidal attack on the Chinese with the words, "We had not killed all of the Chinese, but we would have if we had better communications between our forces and if the weather had not been cleared. We had not killed all of the Chinese, but would have if we had better communications between our forces and if the weather had not cleared." Uttered by Tibetan leader Gampo Tashi after 200 men destroyed 500 Chinese quarters, many vehicles, and killed 550 Chinese soldiers. So perhaps from these examples, you can see why, from the Chinese perspective, it's probably pretty easy to view us as the bad guys and them as the good guys, right? They can have black and white thinking for themselves against us, just like we can have it for us against them. Gray thinking. The solution to black and white thinking is gray thinking. When people lack nuance, they become more extreme in their views, and they actually make the problem worse. Black and white thinking is blind to all the ways that they themselves are wrong, and they are blind to all the ways that they themselves are contributing to their own image as a villain in the other's eyes, despite them blindly seeing themselves as a righteous hero. But once you enter this gray territory, you have a more nuanced perspective to understand how to have empathy for others. Only with this transcendent perspective, this bird's eye view of, oh, these guys think that they're the good guys, and oh, these guys also think that they're the good guys, but there's this complicated stuff, and this bird's eye view can have empathy for both sides in order to accurately understand the gap between us and others, in order to truly solve problems. Dehumanization. This is an image produced by the Chinese during the Hong Kong riots, and these people depicted here are 5 of the prominent Hong Kongese people that were vocal about supporting the Hong Kong riots. And so the Chinese created this meme that cockroachified these Hong Kongese villains. Dehumanization. One of the most abominable forms of bias is the dehumanization of a whole group. It's abominable because of what it can lead to. In Germany, leading up to World War II, the Nazis referred to the Jews as rats. In China, during the Hong Kongese protests, the Hong Kongese were referred to as cockroaches by the CCP state media. We should be on alert for signs of extreme bias and try to root them out as early as possible before they take sway in the culture. It seems like the only way atrocities can be committed is if the target group is first vilified and dehumanized. I think that it should be illegal to compare a group to something that is pestilent in nature, because that which is pestilent is metaphorically implying that that group is worthy of extermination. What do we do with rats? We exterminate them. What do we do with cockroaches? We exterminate them. What do we do with viruses? We exterminate them, right? Anything that is a metaphor for extermination is dehumanization, and to me it seems very dangerous. Catastrophizing. One of the most toxic aspects of our political debate is what Jonathan Haidt called catastrophizing in his book, The Coddling of the American Mind. Catastrophizing is basically the idea of applying a slippery slope logic to a certain behavior, essentially concluding that the foreseeable result of said behavior would be catastrophic. Even worse, the person guilty of catastrophizing will often conclude that the person performing the behavior consciously knows that they are causing a catastrophe, and therefore they are morally guilty of said catastrophe that has yet to occur, that is not even proven to occur, and merely exists in their imaginations as an inevitable occurrence in the future. Common examples of this are the idea that certain types of speech are dangerous because they might be offensive to some people, and those people might be emotionally fragile and commit suicide because of said speech, and therefore the person that is doing the speaking is morally responsible for systemic murder, right? Because person commits offensive speech, it cascades into a series of domino effects where people listen to it, people are suicidal, people commit suicide, and then all of these suicides that filter throughout society are all the fault of the person that is doing the speech. And so by imputing all of that to them, they are responsible for murder, just by speech itself. In identifying dehumanizing speech as abominable, I don't mean to imply that we should utilize a catastrophizing approach to dealing with dehumanizing speech. For example, I don't think that we should impute the sin of intent to commit genocide to every person who uses offensive metaphors. But I think we should all learn to recognize it and call it out for what it is: unacceptable, dehumanizing speech, right? So I don't agree with catastrophizing. I think catastrophizing goes too far. I think we should stop the harmful speech, but we shouldn't impute guilt of murder to people who just say things. So here is a spiral dynamics chart, or in other words, integral theory chart, showing different levels of consciousness according to spiral dynamics. And off on the side here, I have interpreted what I believe is a fair representation of what each ideology would think about a foreigner, right? And we'll discuss it down here. Levels of bias. Spiral dynamics, similar to integral theory, proposes a hierarchy of worldviews that arise through the evolution of a cultural zeitgeist. Each color represents a different style of worldview. And in integral theory, they change up the colors a bit, but it's basically the same. Depending on our level of collective cultural development, a culture may have a net bias along one of these levels within the spiral hierarchy. Individuals within the culture might be at different stages of consciousness and worldview, but the majority worldview is what drives policy. I'm relatively new to integral thinking, so I might be off in my assessments, but the following is my best attempt to explain the flow of evolution of human thought along this integral hierarchy. Bias assessment. Based on the spiral dynamic chart of biases, you might be able to measure the media you consume in relation to these biases. Do you like to read articles expressing how dangerous China is? Perhaps that is because your most archaic threat detection biases are being stimulated. Do you really want to have a bias to view the other as dangerous? Or maybe you like to consume information articles that express all of the weird things Xi Jinping is doing, highlighting how different the Chinese are, or how mysterious they are. Do you really want to develop that mystical bias, though? Or maybe you like to watch YouTube videos that show how easy it would be for the US to defeat China in a war. Perhaps this is exposing some tribal biases at the red layer. Alternatively, maybe you like to investigate all the horrors committed by Mao Zedong. Perhaps you like to read about the CCP's abuses of different groups. This might be signifying to you that you have a religious authoritarian bias to view the other as evil. What about if you like to pay attention to economic news in Asia? Maybe you're interested in trade laws or tariffs, right? Perhaps you have a modernistic bias to look at China through the lens of money and opportunity. And if you like to consume information about Asian American issues and the rise of anti-Asian hate and the history of discrimination against Asians, perhaps you have a postmodern bias guiding your epistemology. When it comes to an integral bias, you may find yourself paying attention to media that discusses China's role in combating global warming and addressing AI issues. Yet to me, it would seem that most media does not frame China like a potential partner or as a fellow stakeholder in world issues. To me, this is a problem. The integral layer of our culture seems to be very weak and underdeveloped. Finally, if you consume Chinese-friendly media, you might... The question we should be asking ourselves is, what type of bias do we want to develop, right? If a bias is somewhat unavoidable, what direction should that bias be going? So now that we've discussed this introduction to spiral dynamics, we can review this spiral a little bit. So down here, archaic level, this is basically kind of caveman, tribal, survival, Maslow. It's very base needs, right? And if you're at that survival level, you're worried about survival, and so danger is what your focus is. Is the foreigner dangerous? That's your lens of looking at foreigners. Magical, animistic. This is where tribalism gets much more real, right? This is probably more like pack hunters, like wolves. They hunt in packs at this level. But at the red level, we've got like this magical animal religion that binds us into a tribe. And so with this focus on security and the magicalness, we might view the stranger as mysterious, right? And weird, mysterious and weird. Then at the red layer, we're kind of focused on power dynamics and impulses, and we might just view the stranger, the foreigner, as weak, right? Either the foreigner is weak or the foreigner is strong. That's kind of what we're focused on. How strong are they? At the orange layer, we've kind of evolved past power. We're now focused on order. An orderly is like righteous. Are they morally good, right? An orderly society is a morally good society, and a chaotic society is a corrupt and evil society. So at this blue layer, we're like, are they following rules, right? So a different culture, they're not following our rules, right? They're not, in America, we have a rule of free speech. Well, China, they don't follow free speech, so they're evil, right? That's the blue bias, the blue lens, good and evil. Orange. Orange is modernistic, it's scientific, it's somewhat philosophical. It's basically the founding principles of America are very orange. Freedom and human rights and economy and capitalism and science and truth. And so from this orange lens, we're trying to build the best society, we're trying to build the best economy, we're trying to get rich and successful, we're trying to level up. And so this orange perspective, it's looking at efficiency and success. And so when you look at a foreigner from the lens of orange, you're going to say, huh, the foreigner, they're an economic opportunity. We can go build a factory in China, we can make lots of money, and then we can have more success. So that's the orange bias. Green, community, ecological, postmodern, human relations oriented. It's this green bias is kind of like everyone is equal. It's kind of moral cultural relativism. Everyone has an equal say. And so the bias is the foreigner is an equal, right? We need to respect their perspectives and stories. So that's a level up. And then integral, systemic integrator, synergistic perspectives. These guys, they're focused on understanding the entire system, understanding how all the pieces fit together, and understanding how we move from worse to better, right? And so this yellow perspective, not only do they respect every perspective, but they want to understand every perspective so we can work all the perspectives together into a synergy so that all of the perspectives are being coordinated to make the world a better place. So at yellow, the stranger becomes a partner, right? We want to use you and we want you to join us in making everything better. And then at this top layer, this holistic universal turquoise level, it's kind of focused on global vision. And I think that it might be fair to say that at this level, we evolve past viewing the stranger as a stakeholder, as a partner, but now they become a brother. So this takes it into the emotional level, perhaps. That's just my perspective on this. It's debatable. Accurate biases. I think the answer to the question of what biases do we want to develop is we want to develop a bias that is as accurate, as rational, and as fair as possible to empower us with the right amount of perspective to pursue collective well-being in an optimal way. Developing an accurate bias might mean consuming information from every layer of spiral dynamics. Developing an accurate bias might mean trying to balance the media you consume by consuming an equal amount of an American perspective as a Chinese perspective. Developing an accurate moral bias might mean trying to integrate all of that information under the guiding moral principles of viewing the other as a brother. The nature of brotherhood implicitly communicates an important moral attitude, the idea that we care about them, that we are invested in them, and that their well-being is connected to our well-being. Accountability. But brotherhood does not imply that we should be apathetic in the face of offenses committed by our brother. Just because someone is your brother does not mean they get a free pass to commit crimes. It doesn't mean that you have to cover for them. A true brother holds his brother accountable for his crimes, because holding your brother accountable is the only way to help him be better. Brotherhood means that, to the extent possible, we are committed to reconciliation, forgiveness, and togetherness in the long run. Brotherhood means that before we decide to fight, we try every possible means of resolving our conflict in more peaceful ways. Harmful bias heuristic. So the way to measure if there is a harmful bias, you could say, the more you villainize a country or group, the more you need to consume their own media from their perspective in order to counterbalance your negative bias and help you develop a more nuanced perspective and generate empathy. So the thing to measure is the level of villainization of a group, right? So you should be constantly thinking about within yourself, how often am I reading an article that says China bad, right? Is it every day I see a headline, China bad, and I click? Or is it once a month? Or is it once a year? That's a metric. That's measurable. And then you can measure the opposite. How often do I read an article that the title says, China good, right? That's the opposite metric. Biblical wisdom. If we look at the Bible through an evolutionary lens, we might expect to see that the philosophies in the Bible might evolve over time in a way that corresponds to the evolution of different game theoretic strategies at the tribal level. Integral theory is another lens through which we can view the wisdom contained within the Bible. For example, based on the spiral, we might expect lower levels of conscious development to be present in the earlier time periods of the Bible, and maybe higher levels of consciousness will be present in latter parts of the Bible. In the following sections, I will attempt to show how much of the Old Testament is based around tribal ideas of revenge, hatred, genocide, tit-for-tat punishment of the wicked, right? Lower level, red or blue, or maybe purple-oriented philosophies. Then I will also show how the New Testament has a bias for higher stages of consciousness that include forgiveness, love, brotherhood, reciprocity, no strings attached benevolence, or maybe even equality, right? In the New Testament, there's kind of the intimations of the development of this green and yellow and even turquoise philosophies that transcend that tribal level. And if you're curious about this, you can check out my forum link here. In this forum link, it'll explore some more examples for how the evolution of morality, how we evolved from revenge-oriented tit-for-tat strategies towards forgiveness-oriented tit-for-tat. Yeah, it sounds counterintuitive, but a tit-for-tat strategy can include a forgiveness component that can make it superior. So this is one of the classic diagrams of the prisoner dilemma. The prisoner dilemma was one of the first ideas that brought about the idea of game theory. And the prisoner dilemma, there's many different derivatives of the prisoner dilemma. Here, this is a different derivative that talks about traffic, right? So if you're going to have a head-on collision, there are two people involved, two drivers, and each of them has a decision. Do I swerve away from a collision or do I go straight? If there's only two lanes, then only one person can swerve, right? If both people swerve, both people die because both people are in the same lane. And if you both swerve, then you're both in the other lane and you still die. So 0 points. This is a point system. So swerve, that's a bad idea. If the blue person goes straight, but the red person, or if the red person chooses to go straight and the blue person chooses to swerve, swerving is a cost to himself, so he gets less points for swerving, but this guy gets more points for not having to move. So you could say that he gets benefit for being stubborn. Same thing over here, blue gets a benefit for being stubborn if he goes straight, but this guy has the cost of swerving. And if both of them go straight, they both die, so it's bad. So these diagrams are supposed to highlight how different decisions interact with each other in a point-wise fashion, so that you can kind of measure which combinations of decisions are more valuable. And so game theory is kind of the idea that in a population, there's all of these decisions where, oh, I'm going to steal from you, but then you steal from me, and so that backfires. Oh, I'm going to murder you, but then your brother murders me. Oh, that backfires. So like all of these decisions, there's interlocking costs associated. If I do this, you do this, and the point system, there's kind of an evolutionary point system where some decisions are bad because they backfire. And so reciprocity is one of the strategies that emerges where, hey, I'll be good to you, you be good to me, and we both get points, right? Wow, that's a great strategy. So that cooperation begins to emerge. That's kind of an example of how this works in evolutionary game theory. So game theory is the body of study around which strategies help players win games. Game theory has been applied to evolutionary contexts to discover if certain behavior patterns are more successful in an evolutionary environment than others. Evolutionary biologists have posited that evolutionary game theory can explain our moral impulses and our intuitions as evolutionary strategies are trying to maximize our success. In computer-run simulations, these computer program people, they can be programmed. They can program these different type of robots, or you could say non-player characters, or programmed personalities. And these little programmed personalities will mimic humans in their behaviors. Programmers can design these robots to have different moral codes. One popular moral code is termed the tit-for-tat strategy. Under tit-for-tat, the unit always takes revenge on a perceived offense, and they always reciprocate a perceived altruism. Tit-for-tat morality is the idea of, if you are good to me, I will be good to you. And if you are bad to me, I will be bad to you. In a variety of computer program simulated experiments, tit-for-tat morality has consistently performed well as a reliable strategy in simulated social environments. While tit-for-tat might not be perfect, it can sometimes be improved by adding a programmatic element of forgiveness to the strategy, because forgiveness can help remedy lost cooperation due to miscommunication, and it turns a negative feedback loop into a positive. It reverses negative feedback loops under normal tit-for-tat. Chris Bateman summarized the most robust version of tit-for-tat morality as containing niceness, which is to never betray others first, right? And 2, vengeance, which is you need to punish those who betray you. And 3, forgiveness. Don't continue a negative feedback loop indefinitely. And 4th, non-envious. Don't try to compete with others. So it would seem that the integral theory perspective on the evolution of cultural morality, it's trying to level up our game theory morality. This process of leveling up the quality of our moral intuitions is shown in the Bible as well. The Old Testament has a bias for the crude version of tit-for-tat, revenge. But as people get wiser in their moral intuitions, the New Testament shows a more robust version of tit-for-tat that includes forgiveness, niceness, and a lack of envy. The most important thing about adding the element of forgiveness is its ability to end cycles of revenge, classic blood feuds. In an age when information is harder to navigate, when truth is buried in lies and misconceptions, when biases guide epistemologies, when flimsy narratives guide morality, miscommunications and misunderstandings are very likely. Miscommunications are the traps that lead to tit-for-tat strategic failure. These miscommunications lead to cycles of revenge. Only by evolving a more generous game theoretic strategy can we avoid these downward spirals. Let's flesh that out a bit. Why does the lack of forgiveness cause this cycle to continue, the cycle of revenge? Well, the reason that forgiveness is a great component to add to tit-for-tat is because when these creatures are interacting, perceptions are different from reality, and these creatures can exhibit errors, right? So for example, let's say someone is trying to be nice to you, but you interpret their niceness as an insult. That starts off a miscommunication, which becomes a cycle of revenge. It's like, oh, you insulted me, so now I'm going to insult you. But then from their perspective, they're like, I never did anything to you. Why are you insulting me? Now they're going to insult you back, and you've created a loop. You've created a feedback loop. Okay, you want to insult me? Now I'm going to insult you twice as hard. I'm going to commit violence, and we're going to have a tribal war because both sides think that they're innocent, right? Because of this miscommunication was the fundamental impetus for the cycle of revenge. Beautiful souls. Look at all these children. Aren't they beautiful? Ever since I was 18, I started studying the Chinese language in preparation for an LDS mission to spread Mormonism to the Taiwanese people. I had a wonderful experience in Taiwan where I was able to connect with the locals, to learn their culture, and to see the goodness in their hearts. As a missionary in Taiwan, I found that many Taiwanese were sincere and patient. Many would be willing to sit by the side of the road and talk with me about religion for a whole half an hour in the sun. Many would respond with smiles and love instead of hateful frustration. Strangers would see us missionaries sweating on our bikes, and they would secretly deliver drinks to us. Old ladies exercising in the park would share their fruit with us every morning and let us do our exercises with them. The church members would invite us into their homes and treat us to family dinners. The members would serve us without a second thought. Sometimes the Taiwanese people would share with us their deepest fears and their greatest desires. I once met an old man who loved me like a grandson. I met mothers who treated us like sons. I met brothers who treated me with the sincerity of camaraderie. I was touched by their love. I was touched by their kindness. I was touched by their hospitality. I learned to love Taiwan with all of its virtues and flaws. Perhaps kind of like a parent loves their child. It was an unconditional love. Taiwan was my baby. I had invested 2 years of my life and all of my heart into serving Taiwan. I just wanted the best for it, no matter what that was. Since then, I have left the church and become an atheist. But all along, Taiwan has always had a special place in my heart. I have been concerned over the Taiwan-China conflict for a long time. I would absolutely hate to see Taiwan destroyed in the process of acting as a battlefield between China and the United States. There are so many beautiful souls in Taiwan, and the thought of their suffering brings me great angst. Chinese culture. After leaving the LDS church, I began dating a Chinese girl. This was mostly my first exposure to Chinese culture, other than that of the Taiwanese version of Chinese culture. I learned the deep nature of their cultural ethic of reciprocity, most likely inspired by Buddhism. The root of this ethic seems to come from the idea of karma. If you do good, good will return unto you. If you do evil, evil will return unto you. They applied this principle to their relationships, whether romantic, familial, or even business-related. If you gave a family member a gift, they were basically obligated to return a gift of equal or greater value. Otherwise, they might suffer some sort of a karmic debt. I can't find the source, but I remember a Buddhist quote that goes something like, "If you do a pound of good unto others, others will return more than a pound of good unto you. And if you continue this cycle of returning greater goodness for each pound of goodness you receive, you will grow closer in your bonds as you develop a relationship like a well springing forth everlasting goodness in this life and lives to come." I found this to be an awe-inspiring quote that motivated me to want to invest more into my relationships with people, in the hope that they could grow into something deeper and more beautiful. I found that many Chinese actually tried to implement these ideas in their life. They have a strong culture of gift giving. They try to put a lot of effort into figuring out what would be the perfect gift for someone based on their interests. They are not shy about spending money on gifts for others because they know that the receiver will spend an equal to or greater amount of money and effort in returning the favor with a gift in the future. These cycles of gift giving connect them closer and closer in their relationships. The word for this in Chinese is guanxi. Instead of worrying about wasting money on a gift, they treat it like an investment. Instead of trying to be cheap and save money, they try to work harder and smarter so that they can afford to invest in their relationships. Chinese also apply this karmic principle to their dining habits. Instead of the somewhat cold and unfriendly culture of splitting the bill in America, the Chinese often compete over who gets to pay the bill for the group. It is seen as an honor to get to pay for everyone. Magnanimity and generosity are virtues they try to express in groups. In fact, they are so passionate about this that often someone will pretend to leave the table early to go to the restroom, but instead they are secretly finding the cashier so that they can pay for the table in advance so that no one can compete with them for the opportunity to pay the bill. In their mind, they probably see this as an investment in good karma. If these are good friends, they will remember your generosity and pay for your bill next time. If they never return the favor, then that is a signal that maybe they aren't as good of a friend as you thought, and this can be a signal to stop investing in the relationship. Karmic principles also seem to apply to parent-child relationships. Parents often try to invest in their children. They work hard to have enough money to get their children into the best schools. They financially support their children well past adulthood, sometimes even helping their child buy a house. The parents have faith that they can rely on their children for retirement. When parents become old, it becomes time for children to repay the karmic debt and take care of the parents in their feeble years. I will never forget the time when my ex-girlfriend's Chinese parents came to America to visit us. They were very genial and warm to me, even though I was a foreigner and marrying their daughter into another country, into another culture, and to another race. It wasn't the most comforting idea to them. Every night her parents would put a lot of effort into cooking a nice Chinese meal for the four of us. Then we would chat over some wine and discuss a variety of topics. Her father treated me like a son, challenging my alcohol tolerance and discussing the deeper topics of life with me. One night will always stand out to me in particular. We were discussing the history between America and China. He gazed off into the distance, as if his mind was wandering through time. And he said, "You know, Seth, in World War II, Japan was really beating us up badly. It was you Americans who came to our defense at that time. We will never forget the sacrifices you Americans made to help us at that time. We will never forget our American brothers who died for us." It was a very poignant moment for me, as I realized that there must be a deep yearning in the hearts of many Chinese to embrace the opportunity for brotherhood with America. But since World War II and the rise of Chinese communism, they have been treated more as an enemy than a brother, having to face the brute strength of the American military in both the Vietnam and Korean wars, and constantly watching out for CIA sabotage operations. I have found that Chinese seem to have a 5,000-year perspective on history, whereas Americans seem to have an only 300-year perspective on history, since each of our nations has existed over different scopes of time. From the perspective of the American history, the Kennedy assassination was a long time ago, relative to a history totaling 300 years. But for the Chinese, British offenses against China 200 years ago are still emotionally resonant within them as if they happened yesterday, since from a 5,000-year perspective, 200 years ago isn't that long ago. A lot of conflict can come from different frames of reference. If one person has a long memory of all the offenses the other person has committed against them, then they will think that their attitudes are justified. If someone has a short memory with little understanding of how they have offended someone, they will feel that negative attitudes against them are unjustified. If we incorporate biases into how we remember offenses, we will further warp our understanding of reality. If we only remember the list of offenses that others have committed against us, but we forget, conveniently, all the times we have offended others, we will be creating a black and white worldview that paints us as the good guys and them as the bad guys. But this worldview is fundamentally inaccurate. When we start to fight our biases and become educated on how we have offended others, then we have entered into gray territory. And we can understand that this isn't about how one team is good and the other team is evil. This is about how we are all one big human family, and we need to learn how to communicate properly and treat each other better so that we can cooperate in the long run. While living in Taiwan for my second time between 2016 and 2018, I had the privilege of becoming friends with a group of Chinese students that were studying at a Taiwanese university. It seemed like, despite the fact that Taiwanese are incredibly friendly to foreigners, there is still a lingering feeling within foreigners of being a little bit like outsiders in Taiwan. So it becomes easy for foreigners of diverse countries to band together in friendship, since they share their outsiderness in common. These Chinese friends treated me like family. We played together, we ate together, we even filmed videos together for fun. There was nothing unique about their nationality that would stop them from treating me like family. Again and again, whether it was the Taiwanese or the Chinese, the spirit of brotherhood and familial love came naturally for us. This constantly inspired me. If it was possible to generate familial love at the individual level, why would it be impossible to generate familial love at the national level, at the collective level? What stops our nation from becoming a best friend nation of China and Taiwan? This is an image of brotherhood, Sam and Frodo, with the caption, "Somebody to die for." Transcendent love. Familial love is a powerful thing. The way I like to define transcendent value is anything that we would be inclined to value more than our own lives. When mothers love their children, this often becomes a transcendent love when the mother is willing to risk her life for their child. When the man is willing to risk his life for the woman, his love has become transcendent. Similarly, I believe that love between nations can grow to transcendent levels. Once love grows to the depth of brotherhood, we will be willing to die for our brothers, even if they are of a different race. Brotherly conflict. But what happens when my brothers decide to fight each other? What happens when I love my Chinese brethren and would be willing to die for them, but I also love my Taiwanese brethren and would be willing to die for them as well? If China decides to invade Taiwan, what is someone like me to do about it? I think it makes sense when we put it into the context of one brother bullying another brother. Just because I love my brother doesn't mean I can stand by and do nothing while he harms my other brother. Loving your brother means holding them accountable and helping them on the path to treating their brother properly, even if that requires unfriendly measures. Tough measures can be an expression of love because we want to help our brother live up to their true potential. But there is a difference between engaging in tough measures out of love rather than enmity. It is much easier to accept punishments when the context of love is understood. But when animosity is the motivating factor, the lesson will never be learned, but rather a cycle of revenge will begin. Evolutionary conflict. In studying evolutionary psychology, I learned from Robert Sapolsky that different species have different game theoretic strategies. Tournament species like gorillas are oriented around competition. These competing males try to become the strongest male around so they can get all the women. This competition makes it impossible for gorillas to work together as a team with each other. Their sense of family is very narrow. Pair bonding species, on the other hand, focus on a cooperative strategy. The males are less focused on becoming the strongest male, and they are more focused on having the biggest chain of cooperation. Genders are less dimorphic, so the males are more similar to females. These pair bonding species, i.e. apes, have a greater scope for their definition of family, which means that they can form large groups of apes to perform raiding parties, engage in tribal warfare, and even genocide against neighboring tribes. The neurotransmitter oxytocin seems to be the chemical that allows us to form deep familial bonds of love, but this chemical is a dangerous double-edged sword because oxytocin increases our hatred of those who are threats to those we love. With brotherly love comes the ability to hate those outside your circle of brotherhood. I think that the Chinese have a well-developed ability to harness oxytocin to develop brotherly love among their own citizens. But the danger is when the Chinese government sends their people messages that they should interpret Westerners as a threat to their own people, the people they love. The Chinese government can hack into their love for their families and their love of their nation and weaponize it against the West. Inward focus. I have always felt that I should live my life in such a way that it is so visibly noble and visibly good that any negative gossip about me would be promptly debunked merely by a quick observation about the way I live my life. Developing this philosophy has allowed me to never suffer the anxiety of wondering what others would think of me. If others are fed a negative narrative about me, I would hope that getting to know me would immediately solve that problem. And if the way I live doesn't immediately debunk any negative gossip, perhaps I deserve those negative impressions for failing to live as nobly as I aspire to. Perhaps similarly, we as Westerners need to raise the standard for how we carry ourselves about in our international behavior. Perhaps we need to look inwardly at our own hypocrisies, contradictions, and mistakes, and try to rectify them first. Only when we have set the example for noble foreign policy can we lead by example. Only when we set a stellar example can our behaviors immediately debunk anything that the Chinese government wants to tell their people about us in order to villainize us. So instead of focusing on how evil the Chinese government is, we should focus on how we can live in such a way that is so noble and so beyond reproach that the Communist Party has no ammo with which to besmirch us. This is a diagram. Within these quadrants, we've got epicuricacy, compersion, empathy, and jealousy. So up here, it says, bad stuff happens to others. Are you happy when bad stuff happens to others? That is epicuricacy. Are you happy when good stuff happens to others? That is compersion. Are you sad when bad stuff happens to others? That's empathy. Are you sad when good stuff happens to others? That's jealousy. The fact that compersion is such an uncommon word in English is actually a problem culturally. Daniel Schmottenberger. Compersion. Compersion is the idea of being happy when others are happy. This is probably one of the most healthy virtues we can develop. It is the positive version of empathy, which is empathy being feeling sad when others are sad. When we truly view others as family, their happiness and their sadness becomes tethered to our own. This means we look for solutions that benefit the group rather than just one side of the group. If we as a nation work on developing compersion, we will be in a better place for solving the great global problems that the future will bring. Here's an image of some monkeys engaged in reciprocal behaviors. They're helping each other by picking out the parasites. Reciprocity. One of the fundamental elements of cooperation is the principle of reciprocity. As tit-for-tat morality suggests, just as we have an evolutionary instinct to get revenge on those who harm us, we also have an evolutionary instinct to respond positively to those who are good to us. When I was a teen, I found myself stuck in a negative relationship with a sibling. It seemed obvious to me that we had developed a cycle of revenge, each offense being responded to with an equal to or greater offense. I was frustrated by this downward spiral of negativity. A lesson in church about the principle of reciprocity rang true to me. I realized that I could try an experiment in reciprocity to fix my relationship. It was connected to Jesus' teaching, which was admonishing people to return good unto those who commit evil against us. I could choose to respond positively, nicely, and kindly to my sibling anytime they lashed out to me in negativity. Obviously, I had already become a villain in the mind of my sibling. But if every time they were mean to me, I responded by being nice to them, I figured that my behaviors would start to debunk the narrative in their mind that I was a villain. The more I repeated this pattern, the stronger it would become. Eventually, my sibling would realize that they were wrong in viewing me as a villain, and they would feel obligated to stop being mean to someone who was noble enough to never take revenge. This experiment with my sibling took a few weeks and a couple dozen instances of returning good in exchange for evil, but it eventually worked. The downward spiral of negativity was cured. I think similarly, our relationship with other countries could be this way. If we have a history of negative interactions with China, it is easy for them to frame us as a villain in their minds. Each time we do something, they can interpret what we do in the most negative way possible because of this villain narrative. But what if we collectively decide to end the downward spiral in our relationship? What if we collectively decide to return good for evil? What if we decide to treat them as brothers, even if they treat us as villains? What if our outstretched hand of patience and love could eventually touch their hearts? What if the way we expressed our love to them was so palpable that it could instantly debunk any narrative that we were the villains? What if our deep desire for friendship could be reciprocated? What if a deep commitment to being good to them could create a cycle of positivity in which they felt a karmic debt to also be good to us? What if this cycle of positivity could create a deep and everlasting friendship between two of the most powerful nations on Earth? What if the Thucydides trap could be replaced by world peace? Here's an image called the cycle of revenge, downward spiral. There's two crying individuals who are very frustrated, and in their minds, they are the Star Wars hero, and the other side is the Star Wars villain. And just a very simple example here. This side says, "Ow, you punched me first," and the other guy says, "No, you punched me first." And then the original guy says, "Now I have to punch you back twice as hard." And then the other guy says, "Not fair, I'll hit you back thrice and even harder." And then the first guy says, "Go die." And the other guy says, "No, you go die." Obviously, this is a very childish example, but it kind of explains how these different, these villain narratives between offenses, they begin to escalate. A small offense escalates into a worse offense, and it just keeps escalating into worse and worse offenses until it descends into warfare, basically. That's the analogy here. So here is a diagram called Reverse the Cycle of Revenge. And we've got the fragile Team A, signified by the crying dude, and then we've got the stoic Chad guy who's confident and self-assured in his philosophy on Team B. And the original guy, he's viewing this black and white hero-villain narrative, where the confident guy, the Chad, he's viewing the relationship as a team. It's we're all in this together. He's got the brotherhood mentality, right? So on the left-hand side, we've got the toxic response, and we've got the response from a brother who is attempting to reverse the cycle of revenge. So first guy says, "Curse you," and then the response, "Bless them that curse you." And the first guy, "I hate you." The response, "Do good to them that hate you." The first guy, "You are evil. I must abuse and persecute you." And then the response, "Wish the best for those who persecute you." The first guy, "You are my enemy." And the response, "Love your enemies." You might recognize some of this logic. A lot of this comes from Jesus himself. Jesus taught the pattern of how to reverse the cycle of revenge. And now we have an image titled The Cycle of Friendship. Now, both sides have developed the brotherhood mentality, and down it starts at the bottom and goes upwards into a better and better friendship. And then the Stoic Chad is saying, "You probably didn't mean it," referring to prior offenses. He's given him the benefit of the doubt that it wasn't intentional. And then the original guy says, "Sorry about that." Response, "Don't worry about it, I forgive you." The first guy, "Respect." The response, "I want to understand your perspective." Again, the first guy, "I'll be there when you need me. If it matters to you, it matters to me. I got your back. I honor you, bro. I will die for you. I love you, man." This is how a relationship can cycle into more and more positivity and greater brotherhood. Image that says, "Do not cross the red line." Red lines. I once had a discussion with an anti-China hardliner who said, "I don't want to soften towards China because I feel that they need a spanking." People seem to have a fear that animosity is necessary to develop the emotional momentum to punish those who deserve punishing. But in the context of a family, I believe this is inaccurate, because when parents discipline their children, animosity is never needed as a motivating factor. It is very easy to allow your love to be the motivating factor in disciplining your child. Life is dangerous. A child who makes ignorant mistakes can harm their own well-being. A parent is obligated by love to teach their children to not harm their own well-being. This may require short-term pain that mitigates long-term pain. What parents often do is establish red lines for which behaviors will not be tolerated. These rules help educate the child on the proper path of development. Perhaps parents might make a rule such as no hitting. When the child hits another child, the parent must make sure that the child suffers consequences so they can learn how important this rule is for their future well-being. Similarly, in geopolitics, we need to communicate our red lines effectively. We need other nations to understand that there are certain behaviors that are unacceptable, even when committed by loved ones. They need to know what the consequences are so that everyone can develop in a healthy way together. If we decide that our Chinese brothers are not allowed to bully our Taiwanese brothers, then we can make it very clear what the consequences will be. Sometimes violence is necessary to prevent further violence, and the abuses of the rights of the weak. In war, often the soldiers are trained to hate the enemy to make it easier to kill them. I don't know how I feel about this. In general, I feel like this isn't a healthy approach, but I've never fought in a war, so I don't feel fully qualified to critique this approach. But I think if we understand that it is okay to use violence to stop one brother from hurting another brother, we can have a synthesis between loving our brothers and warring against our brothers. But if our nation decides to engage in an unjust war, a war that villainizes the Chinese and goes beyond merely protecting our Taiwanese brethren, I will feel that our nation has betrayed the principles of justice. Under these circumstances, I would rather die in the hands of my Chinese brethren than fight an unjust war against them. You can draft me if you wish. I won't fire my gun unless it is to protect my Taiwanese brethren, mostly on their soil. Chess. Imagine you have been able to successfully time travel all the way back to the year 1900. It's early in the 20th century, and World War I hasn't happened yet. All of the horrors of the 20th century are on their way. You've got a couple of decades to do your best to see if you can change the timeline. What's working for you? You have a knowledge of what human nature can be like in its worst ways. But you also have a knowledge of what human nature can be like in its best ways. In pitting the better angels of our natures against the demons of our natures, it becomes a chess game to see if our angels can win this time around. Now realize we are at the beginning of the 21st century. We are still playing the same game. We can extrapolate out what risks the 21st century brings based on our knowledge of human history. You have a few decades to try your best to help the better angels of our nature win against the demons in the 21st century. If we want the future to be better, we must be like chess players. We must think decades into the future. It's scary because there are many unknowns and lots of dangerous twists and turns. There is no guarantee we will win. But we have to try our best, because the lack of our best effort means that the future will be worse than it might have been had we tried harder. Ideas are the chess pieces. There is a reason religions and political parties want to spread their ideas, because they instinctively know that this is the way to win the game. But the thing is, the chess game we are playing is multi-dimensional. There is a political chess game going on that increases division and hate, but there is also a meta chess game being played, a game that no longer views things in black and white, with heroes and villains, but rather, under the meta chess framework, the division between black team and white team, that's the enemy, and the unity between teams is the goal. In a normal chess game, progress is measured by destroying your enemies and gathering your allies, zero-sum in nature. In the meta chess game we must play, progress is measured by the conversion of enemies into allies, a positive-sum game. The last thing I want to see is beautiful and lovely people on both sides of a chessboard pointlessly aiming their weapons at each other, causing each other immense suffering, merely because they lack the ability to understand each other. In the beginning, I mentioned the following factors influencing our Thucydides trap. Number 1, perceived acceleration of the rising power. Number 2, perceived decline of the superpower. Number 3, rate of amplification of narratives. Number 4, the number of areas of contestation. Number 5, the communication gap. Number 6, the empathy gap. Number 7, the values gap. What if the best chess move we can make at this time is to increase our love for the Chinese by connecting with their stories? Perhaps this love will help us solve the communication gap, then the empathy gap, and then the values gap. Once we have a proper frame of mind for communicating with the Chinese, then we can amicably resolve each area of contestation. And when we truly love the Chinese, we can have the compersion to be happy for their success as they rise in power, because we view their success as our own success. Then it won't really matter if we decline. The Chinese will be more willing to learn from us when they see that we are a loving partner in this world. Our love for them will debunk the villain narrative that they have created and will open the way for positive communication. As we learn how to love our enemies, they will be forced to love us back by virtue of their innate instinct for reciprocity. Check out my blog post, The Philosophy of Chinese Drama, for more information on how to make this next chess move.